My name is Heather Weiss. I've been living here for 10 years in Jerusalem. I came here originally to study the conflict and then have continued to live here. I've been working for the past 2.5 years in human rights, working in a human rights organization that aims to challenge and document the ongoing attempts to take over Palestinian land, as well as settler violence and the accountability, like soldiers' accountability in the violence and the offenses they commit against Palestinians. Honestly, when I see the samud, the resilience of the Palestinian people, I feel honored to be a part of that struggle.
Hello, Heather.
Hi.
We are honored to have you on our show, and we're honored to share your story with our audience. First time you were here was in 2009. We are very curious to know why Palestine, what brought you here, and why did you stay for all those years?
It's a bit of a long story, but in short, I was in the US. I had visited here when I was a teenager, actually, at the start of the second Intifada. And during that time, I had a deep desire to understand what was happening, with the second Intifada. But for many years, I did not. I was in the US and I was studying for my first degree. And then when I was actually working at Qatar Airways with a number of Palestinians, and the Gaza war in 2009 broke out, and I knew I wanted to understand what is happening here. I was also working with international lawyers, so I knew some of the international laws behind the situation, but I also just wanted to know personally what is happening. So I came to study the conflict, and I came thinking I'm just going to be balanced, I'm going to hear both sides, I'll be objective. And so as many internationals and many Americans, we hear a lot of both propaganda, but we also hear that a lot of portrayals of both sides, and so I thought I just need to be balanced. That was my main goal initially when I came. I ended up studying a master's and started working also with women in East Jerusalem. And then, there were more incursions in Gaza, aggressions in 2012 and 14. And I think bit by bit, I began to see that perspective of trying to be balanced was actually only causing me to be complicit in the ongoing atrocities and the ongoing human rights violations that are occurring.
You mentioned in your biography something about a shift that happened in your life, the aggression on Gaza, the Israeli aggression on Gaza of 2012 and 2014. How did that change your life?
I think before then, I was attempting to look at the situation in a very balanced way, just like many internationals and Americans. During the 2012 and 2014 Gaza aggressions, I increasingly had my eyes opened to how the situation here, the disproportionate use of force, the ongoing dispossession of Palestinians, also how you have a whole, Gaza's basically a prison and under siege. And as I began to understand more, I realized I can't just be silent or just look at this only from an intellectual perspective. I felt I needed to take action So I began to go visit patients in Gaza together with other women. I organized women to go visit at Al-Maqasid Hospital, and we would hear their stories, very personal stories of like loss and pain, and it changed something. It made it more personal what was happening. It's not just numbers. I mean, the numbers were horrific as it was, like the disproportionate numbers, but to hear the stories also just drove it home much more. And so I couldn't be silent, and I think that was really a big step towards being more of an activist.
Yeah, you mentioned something about working with women. Tell us about that.
I also began soon after this to work with women in East Jerusalem. Myself and a Palestinian colleague, we did actually a poll of women in East Jerusalem trying to understand what their needs were and to consider starting like support groups for women. And we asked a lot of anonymous questions, and one thing that stood out to us was, one, the women really, they didn't have a lot of support, so we wanted to create these groups as that. And we also, we realized that much of the issues they were facing were byproducts of the ongoing occupation. For instance, even some of the gender-based issues often were byproducts of, for instance, their spouse being confronted by police or suffering humiliation at checkpoints, and then that enters the home. And the women would also tell stories of having their homes raided by soldiers, or in East Jerusalem it's actually police, and this would actually affect the whole family. Like it causes trauma. And so I realized during that time just the day-to-day impact that these actions have on Palestinian families.
Yeah. As an American, what do you think of the Trump's administration position towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I think it's horrible. I think that the Trump administration is basically emboldening the settler enterprise. I think that settlers are acting with impunity, it's partly because of Israel's actions and that they don't actually enforce the law on settlers, but also because of the US administration. I think that there's a huge risk that there will be annexation, in which case the situation would be basically, it would be apartheid. And so as it is now, I mean, it is an apartheid-like situation, but it would basically, it would root it basically in, and it would be impossible to change the situation on the ground. So I think it's very dangerous.
So Heather, through our show, we're trying to show the reality of Palestinian life under occupation, under Israeli occupation. Many internationals might be watching our show on social media or TV. We're trying to show them the true picture of life here. Can you describe to our audience the reality of life under occupation, under Israeli occupation?
Yes. I'm thinking, like I had a Palestinian tell me once that here in Palestine, for instance, no one will ever go hungry, but everybody has their freedoms restricted. And this stood out to me because as an international, something I noticed is that Palestinians, they look out for one another, and they also are extremely hospitable towards internationals like myself who come and visit. You will never, I mean, everybody opens their home up, they give food, they give drinks, but basic fundamental freedoms are being denied them on a daily basis. So, for instance, even just the freedom of movement to go from one village or city to another, it's hindered by checkpoints, by being stopped by soldiers, by oftentimes road closures and roadblocks, which make what should be a 15-minute commute into sometimes even 2 hours. And for other fundamental freedoms, for instance, the freedom from degrading treatment, freedom from arbitrary arrests. Many Palestinians have been arbitrarily detained and denied even basic due process by being put in administrative detention. And these things are routine here. And so I think something I would point out is that it's not that the Palestinian people are living in poverty, and so many internationals, they'll come and they say, well, they don't look like, it doesn't look like poverty, but it's a fact of a day-to-day life in which your just basic freedoms are being denied constantly. And I think for this reason, it always amazes me that Palestinians steadfastly continue to love life, to laugh, and to resist. So.
Okay, we're in Belain right now, and we know that you participate in demonstrations in Kufr Qadoum, but also in Khan al-Ahmar. How important it is for internationals to be in these areas and support people there in these regions?
I think it's of vital importance in bringing attention to the struggles that these communities are facing. I think it has to be done in a very careful way, because for me, I believe that we should be coming alongside Palestinians, and it should be a Palestinian-led struggle. But this is what made some of the struggles, such as Khan al-Ahmar and here in Belain and in Qadoum, this is what makes them unique, is that the internationals coming brings that international attention on their struggles, but still it gives the agency to the communities themselves to lead this effort and lead the struggle, which also brings attention to the actual residents and the Palestinians who are struggling.
Let's talk about your personal experience in protesting in a long protest, which is a 24 hours sit in a tent. Tell us about this experience.
This was it was also another very pivotal time. Basically, I knew a family in Khan al-Ahmar for many years, and one of the family members, one of the women, was actually arrested. And following it, she was arrested on a day in which about 12 others were arrested and like 35 people were injured. There was excessive violence. And from that date all the way for about 4 months, there was a 24-hour protest tent erected, and I participated at least twice a week in basically being one of the groups that was doing shifts. Sometimes we would have 100 activists in the tent, just basically monitoring the situation and waiting in case bulldozers and army and police would show up to demolish this village, which we expected them to demolish the school first, which would deny the children their right to education, and it would also forcibly transfer the residents once the village was demolished. And so we were on a day-to-day basis waiting for this to happen and ready to stand on behalf of the community and to challenge this. Thankfully, at the end of October, we learned that the plans to demolish and forcibly evict the residents were delayed.
We talked about life under occupation, and in your opinion, what is the most difficult thing Palestinians face on a daily basis?
This is a hard question because there's so many things that Palestinians face.
In your opinion, in your perspective.
In my opinion,
yeah.
Wow.
To you, what is the most difficult thing?
I mean, one of the issues that I have recently begun to really be troubled by is the situation of political detainees and the political prisoners, because I think even though it's not happening to everyone, it's happening to such a significant proportion of the population, and it has lifelong trauma and effects. Many of political prisoners suffer torture, and their families also suffer trauma when soldiers enter the homes and arrest people, and it's often so arbitrary, without basis or without formal charges. Many people are denied the right to due process just for vague reasons or for having even participated in nonviolent actions. And so for me, I think this is one of the issues that is the most urgent. I don't know if there's so many issues that Palestinians are facing that I don't know if it's the most important. There's also the continued denial of access to resources and takeover of land, and these are also huge, huge issues that are affecting Palestinian society.
To you personally, when you moved here 10 years ago, what was the most difficult thing? Or maybe let's ask in a different question, did you have any cultural shock
cultural shock.
Or for example, seeing something weird or strange about life here. What was the thing that struck you about living here?
I think for me, constantly like being an outsider, or constantly being, even after living here for a little while, always being treated as a tourist. Sometimes this would be my culture shock, because I would feel like, oh, I've been here now a year or 2 years, and then it would be like, oh, but I'm still seen as a tourist. And so for me, maybe this was one shock, but although I think that's true in many places.
Can have some benefits though.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So let's switch from politics and talk about maybe cultural obstacles. So worldwide, Palestinians, maybe they're viewed, and the stereotypes about Palestinians that maybe they're violent and Palestine is a war zone.
Yeah.
Through this show, we're trying to show that Palestinians, they're human beings. Yes, they live under occupation, they're suffering, but also they have ups and downs. They have a hard life, but also they have celebrations, they have occasions, different occasions, happy occasions. We're trying to show that Palestinians break the stereotypes and show that Palestinians, they love life, and indeed they deserve it.
Yeah.
Having internationals in Palestine or participating in Palestinian life, how could that change the stereotypes about Palestinians and Palestine?
I think it for sure would assist in opening people's eyes, and that they could take that back to wherever they're from. For instance, to come and participate in, I know like the Bethlehem Marathon, they always invite a lot of internationals to come and participate. And so I know a few internationals who it impacted them, because it's just an activity of running, and yet they're running and they see the wall, and they see that Palestinians also love to run, but yet their freedom is restricted. So I think things like this, where people can see Palestinians doing something that's very human, but also to understand the situation, it really does actually help.
In your perspective, what would be a perfect solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
For me, as an international, I don't feel it's my place to come up with a specific solution, but whatever solution occurs, I think it has to give agency to the Palestinians who have been suffering the most in this ongoing situation. And it would also have to be one in which reparations and justice is made, and which much of what was lost is returned. And then both everybody can begin to work on a just solution, but I do think that Palestinians have to be given the ability to independently have agency for this solution and have full rights.
What message would you like to deliver to the world, and specifically to Americans, about Palestine and Palestinians?
I would encourage people to come visit and to meet Palestinians, and to really educate themselves and to understand what's truly happening here, and to come and also join in it. This is a historic time, and I think it's important that everybody in their own capacity joins in the struggle to be on the right side of history here.
Heather, thank you for speaking up, and thank you for standing up for justice.
Thank you, and I'm very honored to participate in this program. Thank you.